Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Garrison Institute Forum series on Pathways to Planetary Health. Today, featuring the president of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, lawyer, activist, author, and mother, Kerry Kennedy. I'm Jonathan Rose, the co-founder of the Garrison Institute. Before we begin today's program, let's review a few logistical items for this gathering. We're in a Zoom webinar, and so participant audio and video, that means yours, will remain off for the duration of the webinar. Put your questions in the Q&A box, which is on the lower right of your Zoom box, and I will try and integrate them into the conversation. We are recording these sessions, and you'll have a chance to review the recordings as well as scheduled updating programs at thegarrisoninstitute.org. And you can also, because I know you're going to love this conversation, and if you want to tell friends who missed it to check it out, they should go to the website and there'll be a recording. This event is part of a continuing series of the Garrison Institute's Forum for Pathways to Planetary Health. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest, Kerry Kennedy, president of RFK Human Rights, a lawyer and activist. She authored the New York Times bestseller, Being Catholic Now, as well as Speak Truth to Power and Robert F. Kennedy, Ripples of Hope. Kerry, the seventh of Ethel and Robert Kennedy's 11 children, has devoted more than 40 years to the pursuit of equal justice, the promotion and protection of basic rights, and the preservation of the rule of law. We could use more of that. She works on a range of issues, including child labor, women's rights, disappearances, indigenous land rights, judicial independence, freedom of expression, ethnic violence, criminal justice reform, immigration, impunity, and environmental justice. She has led hundreds of human rights delegations in support of these causes. Kerry, we are so happy to have you here with us today.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Jonathan.
So let's jump right in. So you're the seventh of 11 children of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. And so you came from a legacy, of real commitment to these causes. But as you look across the 11 of you, many of you are manifesting it in different ways. And so your path comes from a collective and yet is quite unique. So tell us how you ended up with the RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights, and your vision for it.
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, it's so great to be with you, Jonathan. We're such good friends, and I always feel like I'm learning when I'm with you. So I always look forward to being in your presence. So, I have 7 brothers and 3 sisters. And so I'm the 7th, as you point out. And when you come from that far down the line, you appreciate human rights at a very young age. My earliest memories are when my dad was at the Justice Department. He was the Attorney General of the United States at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And my parents really didn't separate their home life from their work life. So we always had activists at our house for dinner or playing with us on the weekends. And we often went to the Justice Department. And I remember one time going there, and our favorite thing to do was we would visit with my dad, but then you could take an elevator to the bottom of the Justice Department. And then there was a passageway that brought you over to the FBI building. And we would watch the sharpshooters at practice, and we loved to do that. And at that time, J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI, not a man known for his love of children or his sense of humor. And he had said that the 2 biggest threats to American democracy are Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. So anyway, we were watching, we had like 7 or 8 kids and a couple dogs, and we always brought a football. So we had the football, and we were watching the sharpshooters. It was time to go. And so my mother gathered us all up, and then there was a suggestion box in the bottom of the FBI building, which is kind of funny when you think about it. But anyway, so my mother took out her telltale red pen and she wrote a suggestion. She stuffed it into the box. And then when she's, she took a while to gather up all those kids and dogs and everything. So by the time we went back up to my father's office, an astute FBI agent had taken the suggestion out of the box, run it up to J. Edgar Hoover, who had read it and then sent it to my dad's office. So when we were walking into his office, he was reading the suggestion, and the suggestion was get a new director. So, so it was, especially if you remember back then how powerful J. Edgar Hoover was and how everybody feared him. It was a very funny thing to do. And anyway, it was an important early life lesson in having a sense of humor about oneself. Sometime later, I visited my dad there, and he wrote me a note, and it said, "Dear Kerry," I have it up on my wall. It said, "Dear Kerry, today the term was Negroes. 2 Negroes were admitted to the University of Alabama over the objections of Governor Wallace. It happened just a few minutes ago. So I hope these events are long past by the time you get your pretty little head to college. Love and kisses, Daddy." And a lot happened between that day and the time I got my head to college. Most of it great. I had a wonderful childhood and a loving family and all of the blessings one could ever wish for on a child. But there were a series of things that happened that threw my life into a bit of chaos. Of course, my uncle was killed, President Kennedy, and that's one of my earliest memories. And then we had the assassinations of Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and then my father, all within the next 5 years. And it's hard to describe the loss of one's father at such a young age. I was 8 years old, but it leaves the work of love undone. And that can never be done by someone else. And then I was in 3rd grade. So when I was in 5th grade, one of my best friends came to me, and she and her family were at our house basically every weekend. And she said that her father was beating up her mother. And I just didn't know what to do with that. And I didn't know how to comfort her. I didn't know how to protect her. I didn't know how to protect her mom, who I loved. I didn't know what to make of her father, who I also loved. I didn't know if it was a secret. Should I tell my mom? What should I do? And then when I was in high school, 2 of my best friends were raped. And again, the secrets, again, the confusion, again, the just being asked to carry more than I had the ability to carry at that time. And then as a senior in high school, I lived with a local family at a boarding school in Vermont, but I was a day student. And the kid who was my age was gay, but he wasn't out of the closet. And about a year later, he was one of the first people to die of HIV/AIDS. And again, that horror of the secrecy and the shame. And then I was a sophomore in college, and I took a summer internship at Amnesty International. And somebody handed me a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I read it, and I figured out that all the crazy, chaotic, horrible things that had ever happened in my life, every single one of them had one thing in common. They were all violations of human rights, and that there was a document, and it was signed by 190 countries saying this is not okay, and we're going to stop it. We are not going to let this happen in our country. And I realized that there was a world full of people, refuseniks in Russia and anti-apartheid activists in South Africa and the mothers of the disappeared in El Salvador, who were using that document to assure those things would never happen again. And that changed my life. And I spent the rest of my life working on human rights.
Wow. You know, what's interesting is that first part of the story with your mother putting the note in the suggestion box was speaking truth to power. And
Yes, it was.
And that has been a theme of your life and your work too. So talk about that, of speaking truth to power, and how do we actually support people who don't have power to speak truth to power?
Yeah. So I wrote a book by that name, Speak Truth to Power. And that book is a series of interviews with leading human rights defenders around the world. People who have faced imprisonment and torture and death for basic rights most of us take for granted. And some of them are well known, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or Archbishop Tutu or Muhammad Yunus. But most of them are grassroots human rights defenders who are not known. And it's interesting. What I've really come to understand is that, there used to be this kind of idea of helping the voiceless. I've never really met somebody who was voiceless in my whole entire life. Of all the places I've been, every single person who I've met who was trying to create change had a voice, and they were using it. And I think really the big difference between being a victim and being a hero is activism with a loving heart. That's what makes a hero. And all of us have that capacity inside us. And people who are in a position of more power than others can be partners, collaborators, can echo the sentiments of the people who are struggling more. But I think, that's our job. It's to realize that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and listen carefully and find ways to, as John Lewis said, cause good trouble.
So you're an interesting point about compassion, because we have learned a lot also about burnout. And it turns out that when people feel deeply empathetic or empathic and don't and hold that within, it festers and can lead to anxiety and burnout. And that when people that compassion takes that empathic feeling and channels it into external action, and that can be actually even joyful in the midst of chaos and cruelty and climate risk and all kinds of things. That is the compassionate action that makes a difference. So I just want to underscore your point about action. Let's talk about where the state of the world today. Certainly, COP26 has been on the agenda, and so there's been a lot of thinking about the climate disasters that are going to come, and they're going to come fairly soon. And for the children who are being born today, they're going to live to 2100 easily, but most likely. And so these are really these are not future dangers anymore. They're present. At the same time, we're seeing a rise of populism. We're seeing, and one more thing about that climate world, so that there will be hundreds of, currently I think there's 60 or 70 million refugees in the world, and there will be hundreds of millions of refugees, of displaced people. I don't think the world's doing a very good job of dealing with this now, and we're going to have to do a much better job of dealing with it soon. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, it's interesting. I think all of these issues on social justice, there are people who have expertise on one or the other and passions for one or the other, whether that's healthcare, access to education, or women's rights, or indigenous rights, or climate change. And they need to do what God put them on this earth to do. But to think you can solve one without the other is complete fallacy. All of these things have to be changed all at once. So there's no solving climate change until you solve the problem that in the $70 trillion investment industry, less than 2% is invested in women and minority-owned firms. There's no solving climate until you address that. And there's no addressing that until you address violence against women. And there's no addressing violence against women until we stop child labor around the world. So all of these things are all one. And we have to take a holistic approach and support one another, whoever is doing whatever anybody is doing to make the world a better place. Our job is to support them in doing that, and then do what we can. And all of us have different roles to play. Some of us get to be activists. Some of us, are a 13-year-old kid who can come home and wash the dishes tonight and cook the dinner and wash the dishes and clean up their room. And that's going to make a difference. So that's what I think about it.
So seeing that these are all interrelated takes a different worldview. We have a worldview that currently has been breaking things into pieces. And actually much of that worldview comes from the current version of capitalism that has pervaded us. And this interdependent worldview is one that is not in conflict necessarily with capitalism, but is much more generated by contemplative practices. So I'd love to hear about your experience with contemplative practices and how they're helping you bring together a sense of all the things that you're trying to integrate.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, it's interesting. I grew up in a very strong Catholic family. And again, getting back to my early memories, I went to Catholic school for 4 years. And in that school, there was the school, and then there was the place that the nuns lived, which was, attached to it in basically the same building. And there was an elevator, and the students were not allowed to use the elevator, and it was an old crank elevator, so you could stop it between floors. And I used to climb into that elevator with my best friend, Lisa Schreiner, and then we would stop it between floors, and then we would pull ourselves out and then shimmy out. And we did that because then, in order to start it again, the nuns in their habits would have to lay on the floor and drop down into the elevator. And then we thought that was very funny. And so I was always getting caught and sent to the Reverend Mother Mouton, and she would say, she did the same thing every time. She would say, Kerry, I'd be like taken by the scruff of the neck by a nun and tossed into her office and slammed the door, and I'd sit down and she'd say, Kerry, remember that Jesus loves you no matter how you misbehave. And then she would give me a lollipop and ask about my mom. That would be the whole conversation. And it was a wonderful kind of vision of God as fully loving and just joyful and loving and cheerful. And that's what I've always carried with me. Last year, I had the opportunity to spend a week on a silent retreat at the Garrison Institute, and it was transformative for me. It was led by Cynthia Bourgeau, a great contemplative mystic teacher, and I learned about contemplative practice, and that kind of, I have to say, my feeling about God hasn't changed at all. I still feel that extraordinary presence of love and acceptance and joy and of basically letting go of the silliness of life. But having that opportunity twice a day for 20 minutes or more to try and release my mind of all of the things that are going on and focus deeply on that love and that space of emptiness. Not trying to not overcrowd that space so that there's plenty of room for God to be there has been transformative.
Mm-hmm. And you've described a world, so there is a world with enormous generative capacity and infused with love, and also a tremendous amount of human caused suffering and human anguish. Has the contemplative practice changed at all how you look upon the suffering and the anguish that people either experience or cause each other?
It's an interesting question. I suppose I approach people with more compassion and less kind of outrage and more compassion about what's going on. And also, I think I'm slower to react. There's this great psychiatrist who was in a prison camp when Nazi prison camp, Frankel. And he said, between stimulus and reaction, there's a space. And in that space lies your humanity. And I think that the contemplative practice has helped me expand that space so as not to be immediately reactive, but to take a breath, or maybe take a day, and approach people and things in a more thoughtful way. You know, Jonathan, I have to say that I think that there's a range of these issues. So there's the irritating things that, you know, the people you love the most in the world do. And those are the most irritating things you come across, right?
Right.
and then, or the disappointments or whatever. And then there's the truly horrific things that you actually need to focus your anger and outrage on. The enormous injustices, the 70 million people on the road, refugees around the world, the 15,000 Haitians under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas, the 8,500 of them who were picked up by the government of the United States and dumped in Haiti, a country which has absolutely no capacity to take care of them. That's where we need to expend our moral outrage and take steps to address it, and, you know, let go of our irritating siblings.
Yes, that's so having perspective, having perspective on where, it's interesting because even His Holiness the Dalai Lama, will acknowledge there are moments in which there's a use for anger, but it needs to be properly focused. And to be done without.
There's a quote. There's graffiti in the pyramids. The pyramids were built
Right.
by slaves, and it says no one was angry enough to speak out. And, you know, we need to be angry enough to speak out.
Right. So, you know, what's interesting, so just before this session, I was with a group of other people, and we were led in a meditation. And meditation is one I've never done before, which was to imagine all that chaos and noise and conflict and all that stuff in the world that is continually assaulting us. And then it was to not deny it externally, but to let go of it internally and create the place of peace within yourself. Because it's interesting, I've always thought of refuge as refuge from it all. And this actually said we need to find refuge within it all, but it doesn't mean that the rest, all that stuff isn't happening there. And then what you're saying is, and then from that point of view, you can actually, instead of reacting, you can choose a path. It's the one that's most effective. That path can be challenging. So I want to talk to you about St. John of the Cross and the dark night of the soul.
Nice.
So describe to the audience the dark night of the soul.
Well, I mean, that is like Einstein asking you to describe nuclear physics or something.
Go ahead.
But okay, so I think of the dark night as it's the necessary path that very holy people go through to let go of the things that are blocking them from being close to God. And the things that are blocking them can be very, very difficult to let go of. You know, there's that story in the Bible where a young man comes to Jesus and says, I pray every day and I comply with the 10 commandments and I've never done anything wrong and I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, well, just let go of your family and come follow me, and let go of your riches and sell your house and come follow me. And he says, well, I'll do all of that, but my father just died, so I just need to go to his funeral. And Jesus says, well, follow me now and forget it. And and some of that, sometimes I always thought that was harsh, but I think that that's what the dark night of the soul it really is. It's the thing that you're torn about, that you feel close to, that is so hard to let go of, and does not seem like it should be in conflict with loving God, or yeah. Going to your father's funeral, organizing your father's funeral does not seem like it should be in conflict, but that's what the dark night of the soul is. It's that internal struggle of letting go of the things that are stopping you. And often I think they are things that should seem consistent. It's not as easy as giving up chocolate ice cream, as hard as that is. That's obviously not consistent with being healthy and strong. It's the things that are like that. I think that's what the dark night is about. And then I think further that journey towards closeness with God or the creator, or whatever word you want to use, is it's not a path. It's not like a straight path. It's a spiral. And so you do it, and then you go around that circle and you go through that dark night and you think, okay, now I'm in the light, I'm closer, I've let go of that, and you're breathing well and everything is good and beautiful. And then you're back into another dark night. But each time you go through them, you're letting go of something else in your life that's blocking you from being close to God, and you are actually getting closer and closer and closer with each round. But all of them are kind of hell on wheels. Does that make sense? What do you say, Jonathan? How do you respond to that?
I think that's perfect. No, because one of the things I love about it is it is not a dark night. It's a cycle that has this deep challenge within it that keeps circling. It's the fact that it's not just one long dark night that comes up. There was a phrase, I don't know if you ever heard the term, the hour of the wolf. The hour of the wolf is at 4 a.m, and that's when you wake up and all those thoughts are with you and you can't get rid of them, and that was defined, the hour of the wolf, in the older European tradition. That was the time in which all of these things came to you. And it's not just 1 hour of the wolf and then you're done.
Right, exactly.
It keeps coming back, but as you described, but it's a cycle that you keep purifying too. So I think your description is really, really beautiful. So talk a little bit about some people like James Finley and Thomas Keating and others that have been have woven into your thoughts about these things.
Yeah, so Thomas Burton,
Yeah.
I would say Thomas Merton and Thomas Keating and James Finley have been so important to me. Again, I think that sense of openness. I think the thing that attracts me to all three of them is that there is a the main focus and quest is towards closeness with a loving God, or enmeshment with a loving God. And then at the same time, the commitment to social justice, and seeing those as two of us, as part of the whole.
Mhm.
So that worldview has been very important to me, because I think it's the way I walk through life as well. And you know, I think when you're on that journey, you try and learn from other people's journeys who have been successful at it, and kind of see what their life path was, and see what they did that made sense that you can learn from. So I like listening to them, or reading them, or hearing their vision, their viewpoint.
And what's interesting is that in that view, the loving God is not a narrow love for me or a recipient. It's a vast and all universe pervading, all consciousness pervading, limitless, vast, and always available love.
Exactly. And also a very human, down to earth. You know, James Finley tells the story about this desert fathers, and that a couple comes to, a family comes and knocks on the door of one of the desert fathers, and he answers, and they say, well, a witch has put a spell on us and turned as you can see, turned our daughter into a donkey. And so can you help us? And so the monk says, sure, come into, and he's living in a cave, and the three of them walk in, and the donkey comes over to the table, and the monk says to the donkey, wow, what would you like for breakfast? And you have such beautiful hair, and what a pretty dress you're wearing, and and do you prefer eggs or muffins or whatever? Anyway, he goes on and on, and he's talking to the donkey as though it's a child. And then at the end of breakfast, the father turns around with tears in his eyes and says, I can't believe it. I thought the witch had made my daughter into a donkey, but I now see that the witch just put a spell on us, my wife and I, to make us think our daughter was a donkey, but she was always a daughter. And so they leave very, very happy and grateful. And the daughter leaves especially happy and grateful, because it was hard for her to be a little girl when her parents thought she was a donkey. But it was harder because some of her started to believe she was a donkey. I love that story, because I think that's the story of all of our lives in a way, right? That in one way or the other, we are thought of as something that we don't really feel we are.
Mm.
And in some way, our brokenness is that we believe that.
Mm.
And in some way, that part of the healing is to understand that we are actually our best selves.
Mm.
and to live that, be reunited with our best selves.
That's really beautiful. So one of the great gifts that you have given me is an introduction to Richard Rohr. And I put in the chat, it just says cac.org, but that's how you get to his website. And one of the things that I got from Kerry was you can sign up for either daily or weekly emails from him in which he collects such wisdom, some as from his own and some from many other thinkers that bring this contemplative Christian worldview to the issues of our time really, really directly. How did you come across him?
My cousin Tim Schreiber,
Ah.
who is, a very devoted contemplative activist.
Yeah, so anyway, I put it in the chat and I recommend it to people just as a way to, part of what we need in life is we need prompts. We need daily kind of reminders of this. So here you are, you've created this extraordinary organization. How many people does the RFK Center have?
Well, on staff, we have about 50 on staff in the US and then maybe another 20 around the world. Our education program has been taught to over 5 million students. So that's one measure of it. And then, I don't know, we work on a lot of different things and there's different pockets of people engaged.
So do you take any of these practices not through your being, but in a more formal way to your organization or to your people or to help them?
It's interesting. The answer is no, not in an explicit way. But I think that that part of the way I just am another anyway, I hope I'm reflect this a little bit. But I don't know, it's not explicit. So Jonathan, but for you it is explicit in your real estate work, so talk about that because that's much more interesting and direct than what I've done. I need to learn from you how to do that.
Well, it's really imperfect, but some of the things we do are really, so for the audience, very simply, I run a company and founded a company that develops and buys affordable housing. So we're typically in difficult inner city communities. We're all around the nation, and we try and make our projects as environmentally responsible as possible, but also bring social health and education programs to our residents. And actually, I just came from a 2-day offsite retreat in which what I realized, which is very similar to your work, that we're plugging leaks in a sinking ship. We are, we're 450 people. It's not a tiny company, but what we do it changes a part of the world, but it doesn't change the world. And so there's a sense of relentlessness. There's a sense of it. The task is, and what's being asked of us, or what I'm asking of us, is far bigger than what we can achieve. So I want us to be climate neutral in a world which is not designed really to fund or to help us become climate neutral. I want us to, I want every child who lives in one of our projects to go to graduate school or, have the best education and the most opportunity, and they're living in neighborhoods which are completely not designed for that to happen. And so the theologian Serene Jones said, we are working on a burning platform. And it's become really clear to me that we're working on a burning platform, and it can make all of the good things that you're trying to do feel like drops of drop of water in an ocean whose tide is going in the other direction. So so to do that, to work in that, one has to, and we are very imperfect at this, but you have to at least recognize that that worldview, the worldview that we are on a burning platform, and to recognize that you really need, so that we need well-being, we need a sense of relationship. That's the other really key part, which is we live in a world that's very, very fragmented, and that the true nature of ecology, the nature of the world, and although I don't use the word God, my sense is even the nature of God is this astounding, total, completely interpenetrating, emergent relationality, that everything is woven together in a pattern of wholeness. And I think that the suffering and difficulty comes from separateness. So the more we can see that we're actually part of a pattern of wholeness, the better it is. And I got to tell you, this just came to my mind, and maybe it's really irreverent, but a really bad analogy. I probably shouldn't make bad analogies, but that analogy, we're on a burning platform. And so what struck me from what you were saying is that if you have a worldview that says that you are on a burning platform, but in an ocean of God's love, and if you don't use the phrase God, then just in an ocean of love and compassion that is all interconnected and fully permeable, then here comes the bad analogy. Then you can be a Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
So I guess part of it is to recognize that this work is really hard, and to recognize that I was to say, if you choose it or if it chooses you, because I'm not, I have a feeling maybe it chose me versus I chose. Anyway, however you get chosen into it, that you really have to find ways to sustain yourself, and not only that, enrich yourself, expand yourself, because this kind of work, this work of social justice or environmental justice, the suffering, from a Buddhist point of view, the suffering is fully there, but we don't always, we don't see it till we learn to attend to it. And the more you see it, you have to develop some belief or sense that you're on a path to relieving the suffering, I was going to say get through it, but you never get through it. Just like your cycles, the dark night of the soul, it's always there, but at least, well, if you're enlightened, you get through it, but that's...
Let's just talk about terms for a second.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting what you mean by the word suffering. And let me just say this. I think you're sad because your spouse dies. It makes you sad. And that's healthy sadness. 6 years later, somebody splashes you with water by mistake and you punch your hand through a window. That's suffering. That's sadness. That's taken the sadness and turned it into suffering. So suffering isn't the healthy reaction to something, but it's the unhealthy obsession with something, or not working through it, ignoring it and hoping you can go over it or around it or under it, but not working through it in a way so that it stays with you. So I want to make sure I understand what you mean by suffering, because are you talking about the suffering in my definition, or are you talking about just that there's horrible things that happen in this world and people are harmed by them and they don't need to be harmed by them?
So I'm talking about two things, and It's an interesting question. How are they related? But so one is all those horrible things, the starving child, the
Yeah,
raped woman, the,
yeah,
those are real sufferings. And then there is the suffering that comes from the clenching of your identity around your idea of yourself. And what you describe in the contemplative, in deeper contemplation, is when you can loosen the bounds. So whether it's suffused by God's love, suffused by emptiness, suffused by spaciousness, um, when we can relax the bounds of our created self-identity, the rigidity of who I am, who I think I am, and open it up to see, okay, so I take this to one little, to see who we are. So what's interesting is, what quantum mechanics has come to say to us is that there is no inherent existence. There's no, the whole thing about the uncertainty principle, which took me a while to figure out, is that it says that that everything arises from causes and conditions. Everything is this ecological interdependence. Everything is, is the flow of, everything's co-creating, and there is no pure independent thing in nature, and therefore, and if you expand that, there's no pure independent self. Our selves are co-created with our family lineage and our DNA and our siblings, our world, and they're even co-created by our experience of all those sufferings that we described earlier. They're just painful, bad stuff that's happening in the world. And so my sense is that when you really, I'm going to tell a story on myself, when you really clench into meanness, like, that leads to more suffering. We were in a meeting related to the Garrison Institute with a great mentor, Peter Senge. And, I was getting really into, and they should have, and this was wrong, and, all that stuff, and self-righteous probably about it. And Peter said to me, "You're doing this from your contracted self. Now I want you to think about the same issues from your expanded self." And it like immediately, like I knew I was like seen, that I was seen, like in my, it wasn't a good part of me. And immediately, like that, what his just saying that to me melted my contracted self, and I got much more expanded. By the way, I absolutely do not do this enough, and it's a real lesson to try and do it more. But in that expanded self, all of a sudden, I was more relaxed. I was certainly happier. I smiled. I made a joke about myself, and I was able to see much more strategically and bigger, and not only breathe myself, but breathe into the issue we were discussing. So that's not the complete relief of suffering, but to me, there was a clue in that about your contracted, narrow, rigid sense of who I am, and then everything that comes from it, which is Buddhism, anger, attachment, greed, but in all traditions, self-righteousness. And then the expanded self has much less suffering in it, much more flow in it, much more interconnection with it, can have much more experience of the suffering of the world, but also the joy of the world. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think it does. I think that, it's this idea of mixing up, seeing the problems in the world, which again, I would say makes you sad that there's a child who is starving, there's child labor, whatever. There's a long litany of problems. And then it sounds like the suffering comes not in the ego need to be able to change that. And, that kind of need for power and control, that that one is unable to be effective in creating change. And so I think what one tries to do is be engaged in the struggle and not engaged in the ego's need for that kind of change to happen. Now, that I would say that on the one hand. On the other hand, it's hard to change things. But I'll tell you what's harder: to stop things from changing. Because that just is not going to happen. So, like, I think that's a place of solace.
Yes, you know what, by the way, it's a great place of solace, because recognizing that everything is impermanent, everything is changing, means there's the potential for it to change to the better.
Is very, very strong. Now, and then the other thing I would say that I take solace in is, if you look at the biggest changes that have taken place to end suffering and for freedom over the last 40 years, let's say 40 years ago, all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships. Today, there's not one left standing. All of Eastern Europe was under communism. South Africa was at the height of apartheid. Women's rights was not on the international agenda. There was a small group of people who were worried about the environment. That was a marginalized issue. And today, there's no right-wing military dictators left standing in Latin America. There's no communists in Europe. South Africa is free. Women's rights are on the international agenda, and 150 heads of state turned up at COP21 last week. So all those changes happened not because of military or Wall Street or governments wanted them to. All those forces tried to change, to stop those changes from happening. All those really big, important changes happen because people like you and me and others on this call harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true. And they worked with their families and their neighbors and others. And they said, we demand our freedom, we demand our rights. And that's actually the most powerful force for change. So you might not see it every day in the work you do, and it might feel like you're on a burning platform, but I would argue that A, it's not really burning, and B, it's things will change. You're just trying to get them to change in a better direction instead of a worse one.
That is a fantastic statement, and I'm actually going to let us end. We're at time, but also it is the perfect way to end. Paul Hawken wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, and he spoke about all these people doing exactly what you said, working all over the world for environmental and social and justice and all kinds of things, and how that all adds up. All that work is creating a movement, and that movement is creating a change. And so let us all, anyway, I'm just going to leave with that. That's a really, really beautiful vision for us to have. And I actually think recognizing that we're all part of that river, or even that ocean of good work, helps us get through the harder times. Thank you all for joining us. This is a fantastic conversation. It's always such a pleasure to see you, Kerry. I want to remind everybody we have continuing events. Next month is an amazing guy named Thibodeau Mannequin. He's the author of a book called Larger Than Yourself, and he writes about all kinds of activists doing really interesting and in some cases obscure work, particularly in inner cities, to make the world a better place. So look at our website and our calendar to find other events. Kerry, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Oh, one more thing. I put in the chat the RFK Human Rights Gala. You have a gala coming up on
December 9th. You're all invited.
December
It's
9th?
going to be live in New York City, or you can also come on the cyber version, which is going to be fantastic, 7 to 8:30 on December 9th. So go to Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, rfkhumanrights.org, and we'll get you involved. Thanks for that plug, Jonathan.
You're welcome. And thank you. Such a pleasure to see you. And to the audience, as Paul McCartney said, you're such a lovely audience. We'd like to take you home with us, but since we can't.
That's really great.
All right.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.